Welcome to Adulting on the Spectrum. In this podcast, we want to highlight the real voices of autistic adults, not just inspirational stories, but people like us talking about their day-to-day life. Basically, we want to give a voice to a variety of autistic people. I'm Eileen Lam, an autistic author and photographer, and I co-host this podcast with Andrew Camro. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, Eileen. I'm Andrew. I'm an autistic entrepreneur, software engineer, co-host of this podcast, and the better pickleball player between Eileen and myself. Today, our guest is Christina Bauer. Christina is an author of fantasy books. She thinks fantasy books are like bacon. They just make life better. She has written more than 45 novels that feature demons, dragons, wizards, witches, elves, elementals, and a bunch of random stuff that she brainstorms while writing the Boston Tea. That's a train, Eileen. No, okay. Christina is on the autism spectrum and currently studying for her master's degree in history at Harvard University. She lives in Newton, Massachusetts with her husband, son, and semi-insane golden retriever, Ruby. Welcome.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And one thing I should have added on to that is that my son is 19 and he is on the autism spectrum and nonverbal.
Oh, yeah. That's definitely very interesting. That's my situation too. He's not 19, but he's 10 and nonverbal. Back to you, Andrew.
Okay, so we like to ask every guest how they prefer to identify, and we don't mean pronouns, although you're welcome to share those as well. We mean autistic, on the spectrum, person with autism, Asperger's. Do you have a preference? Not having a preference is also an option.
That's a great question, and I appreciate you asking it. I know a lot of people who are in my sort of situation where we don't appear different right away, like to be called an autistic woman. But because my son is, it's very clear that he's different from the moment you meet him. So I like to lead with the fact that he's a person. So he's my son on the autism spectrum, and I do the same thing in solidarity. So I'm a woman on the autism spectrum.
So speaking of autism, can you tell us about your own autism diagnosis journey? And maybe you can tell us a bit about your sons too.
Sure. I mean, when I was a kid, wasn't a lot of awareness about this stuff. So I would flap my hands a lot. I wasn't great at making eye contact. I'd walk into walls. I'd tell stories to myself for hours and hours and hours. I was a third kid in a family of 6 in a Roman Catholic family outside Buffalo, New York. And I loved telling my stories, and I would just get bored during school and stand up and start telling my stories in the middle of class. And at first grade, Sister Virginia decided that this was not cool. So she sent me over to a priest who, in that day and age, that was what you did, to have my IQ tested and see if I needed to go into kind of an institutionalized setting, which was a thing that you could do then. And he was my first fan. I told him my stories for like 45 minutes. And he told Sister Virginia, you have to let this girl tell her stories. So she had to set aside 5 minutes for me at the end of every school day where I could tell my latest story. And I just learned how to fit in. I think a lot of people from my era and even today, the way I try to describe it is like, you're around neurotypical people and they're like, isn't it so terrible when you're riding the roller coaster at the amusement park and there's nobody sitting next to you? And as an autistic person, you're like, you're in a roller coaster in an amusement park? Like, why are you there? What are you doing? Why do you want people with you? Like, there's this whole kind of structure and understanding that neurotypical folks have about how the world works that's just like not there. It's a gift and a curse, you know? So
I'm going to interrupt you with something that reminded me just so off top. So one of my favorite instances of that, because it was so like obvious, like after the fact, is I had a former employee who was, we were very much friends too. And like how I rag on Eileen, right? Yes. So, and he was telling me how over the weekend, how he was sad, he was all alone, and he went to Chipotle for Cinco de Mayo. So my first question is, well, what did you have? And he said he ordered tacos. And I'm literally amazed. I didn't even know Chipotle had tacos. And if they did, who orders the tacos at Chipotle?
Right. I get it.
I don't know whether that cheered him up in the moment, but at least afterwards, kind of got him away from the crying at Chipotle. It's like, who orders the tacos at Chipotle? Did you know they had tacos?
I did know that they had tacos, yes, but it wasn't something that I knew right away. It took me a little while to discover that on the menu. So
You see the correlation between your story, though. Yes.
yeah, no, I get it. I get it. I also had a lot with in high school where when I'm really listening to somebody, because I take in a lot of sensory information and it gets overwhelming very quickly. So and auditory is my primary way of taking in the world. And so if I'm really paying attention to you, I'm not going to look at you. I'm just going to listen because I'm getting a lot from your voice. And that wasn't a popular thing in high school. I almost got like kicked out for being insubordinate. But eventually I learned that if you look at somebody right here, that gives the neurotypical person the illusion that you're making eye contact and you don't actually have to make eye contact. So little hacks like that. And I just put it off that I was an awkward kid. I liked D&D. I was a dungeon master. I thought whatever. And then when my son, he seemed, typical for his first year and a half, then he lost all language. He stopped making eye contact. He started doing lots of repetitive behaviors and he got diagnosed. And as I learned about him, I realized like, oh, okay. We're at different parts of the same spectrum. And it's been a cool journey to realize that he brings so much beauty and joy into the world, separate from his ability to give speeches, make money, or, have progeny, and being able to open up my eyes to the beauty in myself that I didn't want to accept before because I just saw it as different and weird and wrong. So, that's like a 10-year long journey with a lot of therapy, but that's where I got.